Cormac McCarthy and anti-humanism. I am so excited to bring this presentation to you guys because for the last couple of hours, I've been listening to Blood Meridian inspired death metal and researching McCarthy's connection to anti-humanism, and I've been having a blast. So I want to bring some of that Leroy Jenkins energy to the presentation. I feel like Cormac McCarthy embodies the philosophy of anti-humanism more so than any other school of thought. So this is going to have to be a multi-part series because anti-humanism at some level is endless. And I hate researching anti-humanism because it shows me how humanist I become sometimes. My fragile heart falls for utopianism faster than John Grady's fragile heart falls for Mexican prostitutes. So if you don't know, humanism promotes the potential of an individual to have free will, to have agency, to create rational, a rational life in a rational world, and everyone has the opportunity to do that. And we can become all nonviolent and emancipated individuals. And this was a huge philosophy during the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment period. So some of the first critics of humanism, there were obviously many, but the famous ones that we still talk about today were Marx, Nietzsche, and Heidegger. Marx saw the idea of humanity as an abstraction, and it's just a way to ignore the division between the classes and to enable, massive suffering and inequality. And the solution to that, according to Marx, is obviously communism. Nietzsche saw human rights as something that the weak invented to keep the strong constrained. That's a very Nietzschean idea. And that by containing and by living within human rights, that we're actually not becoming free, we're just becoming more enslaved. We're not living out our true desires. And obviously, we're going to get to Blood Meridian. Like, Blood Meridian is like the ultimate case study of this, but I really want to take you guys down a rabbit hole with the poet Robinson Jeffers. Does anyone out here know Robinson Jeffers? Let me know down in the chat below, because I'm going to make a statement here. I believe that Cormac McCarthy was inspired by Robinson Jeffers more so than any other individual, or at least felt connected, that McCarthy and Robinson Jeffers are closer as individuals than any other two writers, artists, philosophers out there. So if you guys don't know, Robinson Jeffers was a poet that lived from the 1880s to 1962. And he was instrumental in building the American eco-poetry tradition. He was way better than Pound, Williams, and Eliot when it came to eco-poetry. He wasn't trying to act like that red wheelbarrow shit was art. And even more importantly, he called himself an Antihumanist. He believed in anti-humanism. He was one of the only public figures during World War II that opposed America's entrance. And that is very intense. Imagine being, opposing that. Look how the people were treated. I remember this because it happened in my lifetime, that opposed Iraq and Afghanistan. They were being called unpatriotic and a bunch of other things. And in retrospect, they were right. Jeffers was also very reclusive, didn't give very many interviews. He shares a lot of similar traits to Cormac McCarthy, but one is very, very odd. The most insane connection ever. They were both stonemasons. Jeffers, Carl Jung, and Cormac McCarthy all believed in the spiritual power of stonemasonry, building your own house, and all did. Carl Jung built a stone tower, as we see on the screen right here. Robinson Jeffers built a beautiful house in Big Sur. You guys have to go see this. It's one of the coolest places I've ever been. He built this whole house himself on the coast of Big Sur. You can go check it out if you're in the area. And on the screen right now is Cormac McCarthy's house with his second wife, Anna Delisle. So this was, I think, a barn, and he converted it. If you look over at this other area, he built the chimney and all that stonework over there. I just made a video on Cormac McCarthy and architecture where I talk about his deep interest in it. And I'm now going to read you guys a quote from McCarthy's unpublished screenplay, Whales and Men. And this is crazy. He says that to a man who's never laid a stone, there's nothing you can tell him. Even the truth would be wrong. The calculations necessary to the right placements of stone are not performed in the mind, but in the blood. Or they are like those vestibular reckonings performed in the inner ear for standing upright. And that is a very hardcore quote. So Jeffers was very popular in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in American schooling. And McCarthy was very well read. He was a poet. Obviously, he read a bunch in the Air Force. And we know that, as we're about to talk about in a second, that he was a fan of certain Robinson Jeffers poems. So both McCarthy and Jeffers, now that I've kind of given you guys an introduction to Jeffers, believed that the expansionism, that suburbia, were going to ruin society. McCarthy saw this with the Tennessee Valley Authority in the South Knoxville area, and Jeffers saw this because he built this nice house, on the Big Sur coast. And, decades later, there were just massive amounts of not just tourists, but suburban neighborhoods surrounding him. And it was, as someone born in the 1880s, it's absolutely shocking to see the destruction of nature around you and the mindless swarm ruining the thing itself that can give us revelation and meaning. And just to make a quick interlude to Freud and Jung really fast, because we just heard Jung mentioned, psychology helped anti-humanism flourish because we realized that we were just these irrational beings. That's what Edward Bernays and Goebbels with the Nazis realizes, that you can control humans, that the swarm and the masses can be directed in a certain way. And that was, first realized, in scientific Western literature by Sigmund Freud. And in Cormac McCarthy's philosophical magnum opus, The Crossing, he says this, and there also is major connections to Jeffers in The Crossing. Quote, he said that men believes death elections to be a thing inscrutable, yet every act invites the act which follows. And to the extent that men put one foot before the other, they are accomplices in their own deaths, as in all such facts of destiny. He said that, moreover, it could not be otherwise, that men's ends are dictated at their birth, and that they will seek their deaths in the face of every obstacle. He said that both views were one view, and that while men may meet death in strange and obscure places which they might well have avoided, it was more correct to say that no matter how hidden or crooked the path to that destruction, yet they would seek it out. And this is where the inspiration from nature comes from. This is where McCarthy's spending time out in nature and understanding things from a scientific point of view, and Jeffers in the same way. Jeffers says in a poem, God is like a hawk gliding among the stars. He has a bloody beak and harsh talons. He pounces and tears. One fierce life. He has no righteousness, no mercy, no love. So this is starting to sound like Blood Meridian, So speaking of Blood Meridian, the whole theme of the book, that violence is inherent, that violence and war is the core of humanity and humans themselves. And that is basically an anti-humanist argument, that we are not fixable. And this ties in beautifully with McCarthy's positivism. Sorry, I always say that wrong. I'll just say scientism. McCarthy recently said in that Lawrence Krauss interview that he is a materialist. And I think this informs his Kukule problem, where he views the unconscious as not some mystical archetypal zone, but rather the world's greatest problem solver, as he calls it. When there's no way to really control yourself in this unconscious and no way to really understand it, we're once again rejecting the idea that we can transcend and become something better. Most of McCarthy's protagonists, maybe other than The Road, which is really about fatherhood and the drive of family and the human spirit, his characters are usually on a negative arc. The inherent irrationality within us, or the hyper-rationality shown with Chiguer in No Country for Old Men, Alicia Western, even The Judge, those aren't rewarded either. Because someone who is free, like Billy Parham or John Gray Cole, they are delusional. They are seeking this nostalgic new reality. But those who are hyper-rational think that they can control things and they actually have autonomy. Both feel like they have autonomy, but both end up failing. And I think Cormac supports this because he was asked, would math exist without humans? And he said no. Would language and humans exist without our introduction into the symbolic? McCarthy keeps hammering this anti-humanist philosophy in Blood Meridian when he says, quote, they followed him like disciples of a new faith, and they collect the gunpowder he makes for them by circling past him like communicants. What is this new faith? What is this new religious language that they are manifesting here? It is, of course, anti-humanism, scientism, fatalism. And I've always rejected the notion that McCarthy was advocating for this, because we see these glimmers of hope of humanity in the Border Trilogy, in Suttree, in The Road, yada, yada, yada. But the more I read and the more I hear him talk and the more I am shown his perspective of reality, it is dark. What kind of man is he? Well, they ask about the judge, what type of judge is he? And then everyone answers, what's he a judge of? Hush now, he's going to hear you. It cannot be said out, it is so bizarre for the times. It is so alien. And I love the syncretic philosophy, though, that Jefferson's and McCarthy bring into this. And this is where German idealism and other stuff start coming into play, because they believe that the unconscious, a lot of these primordial forces exist in nature, and that we maybe can gain some autonomy and wake up and realize our unconscious and ourselves through nature. That at some level, that's why McCarthy's, beautiful nature writing isn't just scenery writing. He's not just trying to write thematic passages. He's interweaving the characters in with nature and giving nature life, a life of itself. In The Orchard Keeper, he talks about the green fly in breathing and having an archaic force within it. So he's not some scientific cuck who doesn't understand about the magical energy of the earth. But both Jeffers and McCarthy see that as a useless pursuit to try to make everyone care about it. People forever have not necessarily cared about nature. Obviously the Bible, the Torah doesn't help that, because in, a couple passages into Genesis, it says man has the right to rule over the plants, the plants, the animals, and everything else. That's not a human. So there's been a division that seemingly can't be repaired, because now animals are so exploited that there really is no return. And I'm not a vegan or anything, but the harmony that McCarthy lived in his childhood in Blount County, what Robertson Jeffers experienced in his childhood, and then obviously at Big Sur before everyone came in, are transcendent, are magical, because they were these knowledgeable beings who understood poetry and the deeper things of life and could sit with it and be interested in stonemasonry and, the deeper aspects of the trivium and the quadrivium. This is what we have lost, and that's why we have all these depressed motherfuckers out here now. This is why everyone is so soft and so weak now. And I'm not trying to be that guy. But so many people embody these anti-humanist ideals now, but it breaks them because it has to have that contrast. It has to be contrasted by something, or you're just going to go crazy. You're just going to melt. Almost every single serious scholar I studied with at in university, and they were all leftists, which is fine, and anti-humanists and post-structuralists and whatnot, all of them were very depressed and had a lot of problems in their life. And my studying of this and dealing and grappling with these questions, as I am with you, it creates a deep sense of dread. When I was 13, I thought existentialism, Camus, Sartre, Kierkegaard, all these guys were bad. But now grappling with what structuralism and Nietzsche's descents into phenomenology, what they've brought to the table is very intense. And I see this is why super far back on the channel, I have a course called the Spiritual Ecology course, and that's still ongoing. I'm still going to complete that at some point. And the whole point of that course and that philosophy is for us to be able to connect with nature in a phenomenological way, to understand these anti-humanist principles and to live them, to be able to break down the hierarchy, but not to get lost in it, and to return to the original referential, and that is nature. And there's a great book out there called by David Abram, The Spell of the Sensuous. This is one of the in my opinion, the greatest environmental philosophy book written of all time. It brings in Deleuze, Husserl, Heidegger, all the phenomenologists, Ponty, but it also, integrates direct experience and shamanic wisdom, that's gone back for centuries. And, as I'm sure that, the loss of ritual and community and these things have ruined our ability today to be able to grapple with these anti-humanist philosophies without becoming severely depressed, because McCarthy and Robertson Jeffers are dark individuals, obviously, but most of them had a very active social life, had wives, That's one of the main messages I'm trying to do here on this channel, is to uplift all the people, through obviously positivity, but through messaging about nature and joy, meditation, like whatever, so that people don't have to be down in the pit. I was down in the pit of despair for years and caused so much destruction, like in my life and in others. And that's why sometimes I get so mad about people. I get some crazy emails sometimes from people talking about Blood Meridian. They're just enchanted by the violence, by the atrocities. I'm like, guys, this is so much deeper than that. Once you digest this, it changes fucking everything. If we're just a bunch of violent fucking blobs, fuck me and fucking call me Squinilius, Jesus fucking Christ. It feels like
mission failed. We'll get them next time.
And that's why I love the Border trilogy. And more recently, that's why I really love The Passenger and Stella Maris, because I feel like McCarthy took this even to a deeper level with his scientism, his positivism, whatever you want to call it. He had to go to that realm. When you start to encounter physics and the depths of mathematics and all that, it takes you even deeper down there. Jacques Derrida and Foucault are a bunch of nobodies compared to the depths that you can go through scientific analysis. But McCarthy shows us the key. If we look at Bobby Western, what does Bobby Western do in the pit of despair? He goes to Idaho and he dreams. He almost dies. He's out there searching and wandering, and he finds a form of revelation out there on the run. He much like Cornelius Suttree in the mountains, goes through these individual ecstatic experiences. And in those ecstatic experiences, finds a form of Satori, these awakenings. I mean, the whole core of that thing, I'm getting emotional here, and it's an incestual story. Jesus Christ. But Alicia just wanted to love Bobby. And like Bobby just wanted to love Alicia. It sounds terrible. But McCarthy knows how to use the fucking language, man. Her gold crystalline hair. He builds Alicia up and Bobby up as these magical beings and adds his magic to contrast all this scientific craziness. And he's once again theming that the deep exploration, that Bobby does down in the depths is him searching for that meaning after having experienced not just the loss of Alicia and all these things, but, he uses the other character in the very opening scene when he's talking to the girl who's interested in Bobby, that he's, exploring all these things and, exploring the depths of his consciousness, searching because he's in love with his dead sister. And so I really want to show you guys, if you guys have made it this far through all this more stream of consciousness stuff, thank you, because I really want to show you guys one of Robinson Jeffers' best poems. Like, this is an epic one. If you haven't heard this yet, like, this is something that I've sat with for years, and it's one of the coolest American poems out there, American eco poems. So this is Hurt Hawks by Robinson Jeffers. The broken pillar of the wings jag from the clotted shoulder. The wings trail like a banner in defeat. No more to use the sky forever, but live with famine and pain a few days. Cat nor coyote will shorten the week of waiting for death. There's game without talons. He stands under the oak bush and waits, the lame feet of salvation. At night he remembers freedom and flies in a dream. The dawn ruins it. He is strong, and the pain is worse to the strong. Incapacity is worse. The curs of the day come and torment him at distance. No one but death, the Redeemer, will humble that head. The intrepid readiness, the terrible eyes. The wild God of the world is sometimes merciful to those that ask for mercy, not often to the arrogant. You do not know him, you communal people. You have forgotten him. Intemperate and savage, the hawk remembers him. Beautiful and wild, the hawks, and men that are dying remember him. I'd sooner expect the penalties, kill a man than a hawk. But the great red tail had nothing left but unable misery from the bones too shattered for mending, the wing that trailed under his talons when he moved. We had fed him for 6 weeks. I gave him freedom. He wandered over the foreland hill and returned in the evening, asking for death, not like a beggar, still-eyed with the old implacable arrogance. I gave him the lead gift in the twilight. What fell was relaxed, Aldani, soft feminine feathers. But what soared, the fierce rush, the night herons by the flooded river cried fear at its rising before it was quite unsheathed from reality. Man, like, this poem always makes me want to cry, you guys. Like, this is some of the best shit ever. Like, I'm going to post a link down in the description below. Like, pause my ass and, like, go read this one again. Like, this is, this just really gets to, like, how fucked up we are, man. Like, driving today on the highway, I just saw a baby dead coyote that was just hit by a car. And it's just like, I don't need to say no more car. Like, it just sucks. Like, just what we've become and where we're at. It's not fun. And like, our relationship with animals and like the animal world in general and the barbarity of it, it's a lot to deal with. And it's the highest stakes game, just as life is, the ultimate highs, the ultimate lows, and animals really go through that. And what does this sound like to you guys? Like, what does this poem, like, what did this remind you of in Cormac McCarthy's work? Do you know? If you know, comment down below right now before I tell you. Is it Cola getting with his sister? No, it's the crossing, everyone. The most epic wolf scene in, well, not the most epic, but the heartbreaking trapping of the wolf and Billy Parham realizing it. And, the descriptions are very similar. So that's what we're going to explore now. We're going to look at Michael Lynn Cruz, Books Are Made Out of Books. And he breaks down, because McCarthy mentions this, like, is inspired by this, wrote about this poem before. And there's a lot of similar usage and stuff from this poem. And McCarthy seemingly was riffing, inspired, if not imitating parts of this poem in The Crossing. And in a little bit, we'll actually, after this analysis, does something similar in No Country for Old Men. Man, you guys got me crying, man. It got me crying. And, excuse me, it also has to do with the hawk in The Crossing. We're going to read a portion about the hawk, and then I'll talk more about the wolf in The Crossing. I mean, I almost just did, but this analysis goes into where Billy kills a hawk in The Crossing. So we're starting right here. The relevance of Robinson Jeffers' Hurt Hawks, which the speaker reluctantly gives the lead gift to a crippled hawk. The poem resonates with several of the Border Trilogy's instances of animals, especially predators, killed at the hands of man out of either mercy or cruelty. The instance Arnold associated with the Jeffers poem is the one in The Crossing, which Billy kills a hawk with an arrow. He's unable to find the hawk after it falls from the sky, but he does find a drop of its blood, which he mingles with his own blood by making a cut in his own hand. Arnold is surely right in making the association. The hawk scene serves as a prelude to Billy's return after the death of the wolf, to a more primitive state of existence, one that deeply alienates him from any of the community. Billy encounters a Yakai Indian who calls him Huerfano, an orphan. Jeffers' poem idealizes the heroic isolation of the hawk, a powerful predator with whom Billy identifies, as is symbolic by the mingling of his blood with that of the hawk. Here's how Jeffers describes the hawk, whose nature Billy internalizes. The wild god of the world is sometimes merciful to those that ask mercy, not often to the arrogant. You do not know him, you communal people, or you have forgotten him. Intemperate and savage, the hawk remembers him. Beautiful and wild, the hawks and the men that are dying remember him. Jeffers' god is as wild as the hawk, and also very like the god who is evoked by different characters throughout The Crossing. And so just the mingling of the blood with the hawk shows that the importance of the hawk to Cormac McCarthy. In The Orchard Keeper, John Wesley doesn't get the money for the hawk bounty. He doesn't take the money. He says, here's this hawk, but I'm not going to take the money for it. That is an anti-authoritarian view. That is like a protest, as a civil disobedience toward people, putting money on hawks. We also see the hawk evoked in No Country for Old Men. Driving out 90 toward the turnoff at Dryden, he came across a hawk dead in the road. He saw the feathers move in the wind. He pulled over and got out and walked back and squatted on his boot heels and looked at it. He raised one wing and let it fall again. Cold yellow eye dead to the blue vault above them. The sheriff takes the hawk from the road and puts it in a ditch, and this is what he says, which is very similar to Jeffers' philosophy. They would hunt the blacktop, sitting on the high power poles and watching the highway in both directions for miles. Any small thing that might venture to cross, closing on the prey against the sun, shadowless, lost in the concentration of the hunter. He wouldn't have the trucks running over it. So we're going to continue this, and this is, I think, by a paper by Paul Graham. There's one more bird scene in the novel. Chigurh is crossing the Devil's River Bridge just west of Del Rio at night when his headlights picked up some kind of large bird sitting on the aluminum bridge rail. Upon seeing the bird, Chigurh reaches for his pistol and fires out the window just as the bird crouched and spread its wing. The narration continues. It flared wildly in the lights, very white, turning and lifting away into the darkness. The size and the white color and the river all point to the bird being a heron. And interestingly, Hurt Hawk mentions the night herons by the flooded river. It seems clear then that Jeffers' poem, in both its narrative and philosophical commitment to wilderness values, did strike a chord in McCarthy's memory. Its academic criticism devoted to Jeffers' work, the term anti-humanism, is a touchstone, one that equally applies to McCarthy's embrace of the wilderness in both his Tennessee and Southwestern novels. So I feel like this was a good introduction to anti-humanism in Cormac McCarthy. I really didn't want to dive too deep into the structuralism and post-structuralism stuff regarding anti-humanism because I feel like that would require a more sober-minded presentation and breakdown for me. So leave a like if you guys like the video. Leave a comment. Help me on that algorithm. You guys already know. Go get a t-shirt. I'm still planning daily Cormac McCarthy content for years. It's not going to stop. I'm like finally at the point where I'm getting obsessed. Like 6 months ago, I started, posting about The Passenger because that was coming out. And I wasn't too deep into McCarthy. I mean, I've been deep for my entire life, but in an academic sense, I was studying other things. I had not studied Cormac McCarthy in like a scholarly way for like probably a year and a half at that point. I'd taken a break and was studying eco-poetry. And now I'm at the point again where I'm just like mind blown and just obsessed with like just diving deeper and deeper into like meta theories about McCarthy. So it's only up from here, everyone. Thank you guys for being here and have a good